Hey folks, welcome back to True Crime Stories, where we cover the most thrilling true crime stories. Before we get going, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for me. Thanks. And now let's get into today's story.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into a case that has all the elements of a captivating mystery. Art, ambition, and a tragic death that shook a seemingly peaceful town.
And the deeper we go, the more we see that things are rarely as they seem. This case takes us to Willow Creek, Vermont. Charming town, known for its vibrant art scene.
Picture this, you're at the annual art festival. It's a day of celebration, artists showcasing their work, tourists browsing, the air is filled with excitement.
Exactly, a very idyllic setting.
But then, a renowned local artist, Clara Prescott, is found dead at the foot of a scenic cliff. And that's where our deep dive begins.
This discovery turned the festive atmosphere into a scene of shock and confusion. Suddenly, the question wasn't about who would win the art competition, but about how and why Clara lost her life.
Let's start by painting a picture of Clara. She was a talented landscape artist, right?
Yes, known for her beautiful depictions of the Vermont countryside. She'd had some setbacks in her career, lost her gallery space, so this festival was meant to be her big comeback.
A chance to showcase her talent, regain her footing in the art world.
Absolutely. And she was pinning a lot of hopes on her final piece, Echoes of Autumn. It was generating a lot of buzz, meant to be the highlight of her exhibition.
You can almost feel that sense of urgency, maybe even desperation, in her preparations. This was her moment, her chance to prove herself again.
Yes, and it makes the tragedy of her death even more poignant.
So walk us through what happened that day. Set the scene for us.
It was a crisp autumn morning. Festival was buzzing with activity. But as I said, that all changed when a group of hikers stumbled upon Clara's body at the base of Lookout Point. It's a popular spot, known for its panoramic views.
So we have this jarring contrast, a vibrant festival, the beauty of nature, and then this grim discovery. It must have sent shockwaves through the community.
Oh, absolutely. It went from a celebration of art to a scene of tragedy in an instant.
Initially, did it seem like an accident? A tragic misstep at a scenic location.
At first, the police leaned towards that theory. The cliff was steep, the terrain uneven. It wouldn't have taken much for someone to lose their footing.
It seems plausible. A tragic accident, a woman at a turning point in her life. It's a story that almost writes itself. But it sounds like there was more to it. What were some of the details that didn't quite add up?
Well, for one, the position of her body was unusual. It wasn't at the bottom of the steepest part of the cliff, which you might expect if she simply slipped. Then there were the messages on her phone.
Oh, that's right. There were some frantic messages that she sent in the hours leading up to her death.
Exactly. The police discovered these messages sent to various people. They revealed a woman on edge, battling anxiety, possibly even fearing for her safety.
Okay, so we're shifting from tragic accident territory into something much more complex. And you mentioned that these messages were sent to various people. Does that mean there were people in Clara's life who were causing her distress? Is this when the focus of the investigation shifted to those closest to her?
Precisely. The police started looking into Clara's relationships and uncovered a cast of characters whose motives and connections to Clara made them persons of interest. Each one had a story to tell, secrets they were hiding, and a potential reason to want Clara out of the picture.
Okay, now you've officially piqued my curiosity. Who were these people?
Well, first we have Margot Sinclair. She was Clara's biggest rival in the art world, known for her bold, abstract pieces. They were competing for the same recognition, the same gallery space, and it seems their rivalry went deeper than just professional courtesy.
So we have a classic case of envy and ambition. Did Margot have an alibi for the time of Clara's death?
She claimed she was setting up her exhibition booth during the time Clara was likely at the cliff. But there were gaps in her timeline, moments where no one could definitively place her. And to make things even more intriguing, the police found Margot's fingerprints on Clara's final masterpiece, Echoes of Autumn.
That's a pretty significant detail. Does that mean she had both motive and opportunity? Were her fingerprints on the painting itself or just the frame?
That's the interesting part. They were on the canvas itself, smudged right into the paint. But there were no signs of a struggle, no indication that Clara tried to stop her. It raised more questions than answers.
Okay, so Margot definitely moves up on the suspect list. But it sounds like there were others in Clara's circle who might have had reason to want her gone. Who else caught the attention of the investigators?
Then there's Sterling Wright, Clara's former lover. He had left Willow Creek years ago to pursue his own artistic ambitions in the city, but he rushed back as soon as he heard the news of her death.
Ah, the return of the old flame. Always adds a layer of intrigue. Was there any indication that their past relationship was troubled?
The police uncovered messages between them, hinted at a complicated history. There was love and longing, but also fear and resentment. It seems the relationship ended on a sour note, and Sterling's return might have stirred up old emotions, both good and bad.
Unresolved feelings can be a powerful motivator. And if he was harboring any guilt or anger, Claire's comeback might have been a painful reminder of what he'd lost. Did he have a solid alibi?
His alibi wasn't completely solid. He claimed to be having breakfast with friends at a local cafe, but there was a window of time where he couldn't be accounted for.
Okay, so we have a rival with a potential motive and a former lover with a shaky alibi. This is getting good.
Right.
But you mentioned a cast of characters. Who else is in the mix? We've got a rival with a potential motive and a former lover whose alibi has some holes. But you mentioned other people caught the attention of the investigators. Who else was on their radar?
Don't forget about Clara's estranged sister, Rebecca. Family secrets always adds another layer of complexity, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Sibling rivalry,
Yeah.
old resentments. Sometimes those wounds run deeper than any romantic entanglement. What was Rebecca's story?
Well, Rebecca, she always felt overshadowed by Clara's talent. She had her own artistic aspirations, but they never quite took off, and there was this lingering sense of bitterness. According to her initial statement, she hadn't seen Clara for months, claimed they had a falling out.
Did the police believe her?
Well, that's the thing about family. Sometimes the truth is harder to decipher than any piece of evidence. The police uncovered messages between the sisters, suggested a more complicated dynamic than Rebecca initially let on.
Intriguing. What did those messages reveal?
There was a mix of affection and frustration, apologies and accusations. It seemed like they were trying to mend their relationship, but there were years of hurt and misunderstanding standing in the way.
So we have a sister who might have harbored resentment and a possible reconciliation that didn't quite pan out. Did Rebecca have an alibi for the time of Claire's death?
Her alibi was the weakest of the three. She claimed she was at home alone, but there's no one to corroborate her story. And when the police searched her house, they found something quite interesting. A sketch pad filled with drawings that looked eerily similar to Clara's style.
Was she trying to copy Clara's work, or was it something more sinister? Could it be that she was trying to pass off her own work as Clara's to benefit from her sister's newfound success?
It's a possibility. The investigators explored that. Art forgery, especially among family members, it happens. But there was another more disturbing interpretation of those sketches. Some saw them as a sign of obsession, a desire to not just emulate Clara's talent, but to somehow become her.
Okay, now this case is taking a truly psychological turn. We have three suspects with motives, opportunities, and a tangle of complex emotions connecting them to Clara. Did the police focus on any one of them more than the others?
It seemed like they were trying to keep an open mind, not ruling anyone out. But there was another figure in this story who added another layer of complexity. Chief Jackson Collins, the head of the Willow Creek Police Department.
The police chief. How did he become entangled in the investigation?
Small towns often have a tight-knit community, and Willow Creek was no exception. Chief Collins knew Clara personally, and he was also acquainted with the other suspects. It raised questions about his ability to remain impartial.
That's a valid concern. Was there any indication that he was trying to influence the investigation or protect any of the suspects?
There were whispers, of course. Some suggested he was too close to Margot. Others thought he was sympathetic to Sterling's return, but there's no concrete evidence to suggest he acted improperly. However, his involvement did add another layer of intrigue to the case.
We have a web of relationships, a tragic death, and a police chief who knew everyone involved. I'm starting to see why this case captivated the town, stalled the investigation. But what about the physical evidence? Did the police find anything at the scene that could point them in the right direction?
They meticulously examined the area around the cliff, hoping to find something that could shed light on what happened. But the terrain was rough, the weather had been unpredictable. Any potential trace evidence was likely compromised.
So, no murder weapon, no signs of a struggle. It seems like the physical evidence was scarce. Did anything stand out to the investigators?
One thing did catch their attention. A set of footprints near the edge of the cliff. They weren't Clara's, and they didn't match any of the initial suspects. It suggested the presence of someone else at the scene, someone who might have witnessed what happened, or even played a role in Clara's fall.
A mysterious set of footprints, that's a classic element of any good mystery. Did the police ever figure out who they belonged to?
That's where things took an unexpected turn. Remember those frantic messages on Clara's phone? It turns out that one of the last people she contacted was a local transient known for his strange behavior and fascination with her art.
Okay, now this is getting interesting. Was he someone the police had already looked into?
He was on their radar, but they initially dismissed him as a harmless eccentric. But those messages from Clara painted a different picture. She described him as persistent, unsettling, even frightening at times.
So we have a potential witness, maybe even a suspect, who might hold the key to understanding what happened to Clara. This definitely changes the direction of the investigation. Did they bring him in for questioning?
They did. But his interview only added to the confusion. His statements were rambling, contradictory, filled with pronouncements of Clara's genius and bizarre claims that he was trying to protect her.
Protect her. From what? From the pressures of the art world? From herself?
Hmm.
Or was he delusional, creating a narrative in his mind that justified his obsession with her?
That's a question that haunted the investigation. Was he a genuine threat, or was his behavior simply the result of mental instability? The police were faced with a difficult dilemma. Did they have enough evidence to connect him to Clara's death, or was he just a troubled individual caught in the crosshairs of a tragedy?
It sounds like this case was becoming more about psychology than physical evidence. Were they able to get any clarity on his potential involvement?
They tried to corroborate his story, but it proved difficult. He was transient, with no fixed address or known associates. It was like chasing a ghost through a fog of uncertainty.
So we have a mysterious set of footprints, a potential witness with an unreliable story, and a police investigation that seems to be hitting at a dead end. What happened next? Did they manage to make any progress?
The investigators kept digging, hoping to find that one piece of evidence that would tie everything together, and that's when they stumbled upon something that shifted their focus entirely. A hidden box containing Clara's personal journals.
Okay, personal journals. Those always add another dimension to any investigation. What did they reveal about Clara and the events leading up to her death?
They were a window into her soul, her anxieties, her hopes, her fears, but they also contained a chilling detail that changed everything. In one entry, she wrote about finding a small, intricately carved wooden bird hidden in her studio.
A wooden bird. What was so significant about that?
It wasn't just any bird, it was a specific type of bird, a scarlet tanager, known for its vibrant red plumage. And here's where it gets really interesting. The transient man who was obsessed with Clara was known for carving small wooden animals, particularly birds.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that the wooden bird found in Clara's studio was possibly made by the transient? That's a pretty big connection, isn't it?
It was a potential breakthrough, a tangible link between Clara and the man whose behavior had been so unsettling. But it also raised a whole new set of questions. What was he doing in her studio? Was the bird a gift, a threat, or something else entirely?
This takes us from obsessive admirer to something much darker, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Did they confront him about the bird? Did he admit to being in her studio? This takes us from obsessive admirer to something much darker, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Did they confront him about the bird? Did he admit to being in her studio?
They did bring him in for further questioning, presented him with the carved bird. His reaction was unsettling, to say the least.
Okay, now I'm really curious. How did he react?
He became agitated, denied ever having seen the bird before. But then he started talking about how Clara was a muse, that she inspired him to create beautiful things. His words were rambling, almost poetic, but they lacked coherence.
Sounds like a classic case of an unreliable narrator. Did the police believe him?
They were skeptical, especially given his previous inconsistent statements. So they decided to dig a little deeper. They obtained a warrant to search his belongings, which weren't much. A tattered backpack, a makeshift shelter in the woods.
Did they find anything significant in his belongings?
What's interesting is not what they found, but what they didn't find. No other carvings, no tools, no wood scraps. It was as if the bird found in Clara's studio was the only thing he had ever created.
That's strange. It makes you wonder if the bird was intentionally planted, a way to misdirect the investigation or even frame the transient for something he didn't do.
Exactly. It raised the possibility that someone else was involved, someone who understood the transient's obsession with Clara and used it to their advantage.
This case just keeps getting more twisted. So if the transient was being set up, who had the motive and the means to orchestrate such a scheme?
The investigators revisited the other suspects, looking for any connection to the wooden bird. Could Margot have planted it in Clara's studio, knowing the transient would be an easy target? Did Sterling have a secret vendetta against Clara that he was hiding behind a facade of concern? Or could Rebecca have been involved in a more elaborate plot than anyone initially suspected?
So many possibilities, and each one more intriguing than the last. Did the police uncover any evidence linking any of the suspects to the bird or the transient?
Unfortunately, no. The investigation hit a wall. The bird itself offered no forensic clues. And the transient, while clearly unstable, maintained his innocence. It was a classic case of circumstantial evidence. A lot of suspicion, a lot of intrigue, but not enough to secure a conviction.
That's frustrating. So, what happened to the case? Did it just go cold?
Officially, the case was closed as an accidental death. The police concluded that Clara, battling anxiety and the pressures of her comeback, might have gotten too close to the edge of the cliff, lost her footing. The transient, while a person of interest, was never officially charged.
But it doesn't sound like anyone was truly convinced that it was an accident. The circumstances were just too suspicious, right?
Exactly. There were just too many unanswered questions. Why was Clara so afraid in the days leading up to her death? Who left those footprints near the cliff? And what was the significance of that wooden bird?
It's one of those cases that stays with you, isn't it? The kind that makes you question everything you thought you know about a seemingly peaceful town and the hidden darkness that can lurk beneath the surface.
And it reminds us that even in the pursuit of beauty and recognition, there are shadows, complexities, secrets that can have tragic consequences.
So what happened to the suspects? Did they just go back to their lives carrying the weight of suspicion and unanswered questions?
They all remained in Willow Creek, but their lives were forever changed by the events of that fateful autumn day. Margot continued her artistic career, achieved even greater success. But rumors of her involvement in Clara's death lingered. Sterling eventually left town, unable to escape the ghosts of the past. And Rebecca, haunted by her sister's legacy, eventually abandoned her artistic pursuits altogether.
It seems like everyone lost something in this tragedy. And while the case might be closed, the echoes of that loss continue to reverberate through the town and the lives of those who were touched by it.
It's a reminder that sometimes the pursuit of justice is less about finding the definitive truth and more about coming to terms with the ambiguity and complexity of human nature.
This deep dive into Echoes of Autumn has been a whirlwind of twists and turns, leaving us with more questions than answers. But perhaps that's the point. Sometimes the most captivating mysteries are the ones that stay with us, prompting us to examine our own assumptions and to consider the possibility that the truth is often more elusive than we'd like to believe. What do you think?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's a reminder that behind every masterpiece, every stroke of genius, there's a human story, filled with its own triumphs and tragedies, secrets and desires. And those stories, just like the art they inspire, can continue to captivate and haunt us long after the final brushstroke has been made.